Sometimes it's very easy to go through the motions and follow a path that you think you're forging your destiny, but you're really kind of trudging along a path that someone else may have set for you. So if you can take a step back and think, okay, I could wave a magic wand. I don't know how I'm going to get there. I don't know how I'm going to do this, but in 5 years, I can see myself in this type of location, or this with this type of success, or with this type of relationship, whatever these things are that are at least fantasy interesting to you, put them on a board.
Welcome to episode 25 of the Innovating Advice Show. I'm joined by Claudia Reuter, who is a GM at Techstars, which is a global platform for investment and innovation. Claudia is also the author of Yes, You Can Do This: How Women Start Up, Scale Up, and Build the Life They Want. In this episode, we're talking through a few of the many topics Claudia covers in the book, including women advocating for themselves, perfectionism, imposter syndrome, and why so many of today's workplace constructs, including things like the Monday to Friday 9 to 5 schedule, are outdated and what we can do about it. And while the book and episode are geared towards women, they are highly relevant to men as well. And because this book was such a powerful read, I'm giving away a copy to one lucky listener. So connect with me on LinkedIn and send me a message about what resonated most to you in this episode, and I'll do a drawing on the 30th of April. My LinkedIn is right below in the show notes, and additional links and notes are at innovatingadvice.com/episode 25. You're listening to the Innovating Advice Show, and I'm your host, Kate Holmes, bringing you the global pulse on financial services innovation, featuring financial planners, financial advisors, and related professionals from all corners of the globe. Let's dive in. Hi, Claudia. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
So thank you for the book that you wrote, which I read over the weekend. And honestly, if I was connected to some kind of machines that could measure my heart rate and my emotions, they would have been all over the place. I had aha moments. I had empathetic moments of anger with the characters that you built, which I just fell in love with. I had calming moments where I felt like you were speaking right to me. And I want to cover all of that, but I want to start by saying that while the book is called Yes, You Can Do This: How Women Start Up, Scale Up, and Build the Life They Want, I personally felt that the book has great advice throughout the whole thing for both men and women, and for women that do want to start up and women that want to stay in a corporate culture.
Thank you so much, first of all, for reading the book, and thank you for saying that. I was hoping that's what ultimately people would think. I originally wanted to call the book You Can Change the Rules, and then decided to go with the more, you can do this affirmational approach. But yeah, I'm hoping that the book speaks to anyone who feels like the current corporate structures somehow aren't fitting with them and what they're trying to do.
Yeah, so let's start with that, because that was one of the things that really hit me. I've always been a little rebellious in how I've approached things, but you talk a few times in there about how we even got to this world where it is Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, and all of the ways that doesn't work in the 21st century. So can you talk us through that?
Yeah, I think one of the things that jumped out at me as I was thinking about the book and researching the book is that until 1974, women could not get credit without a male cosigner. And if we take a step back from there and think about what that implication of that is that what society was saying was, we don't trust women with money. Oh. So we have mothers, we have sisters, depending on where you are in the age spectrum, you likely have someone in your life who was raised in some way to think that they could not be trusted with money by society.
Wow.
So when I think about the impact that ripple effect has, and then when you think about the idea that until 1978, women could not, be guaranteed to keep or get a job if there was a risk that they might become pregnant. And of course, all women essentially have a risk that they become pregnant. Right?
Inherent risk, yes.
Yeah, so I was thinking about like the leaders we have today and how many of them started their careers when, or launched out of, the university system when that was still a reality. And not only how did that impact their decision making, where did they go, but how did that impact all the things that we got taught, all the things we accept as norms? So on this one hand, we have these subconscious biases that we may or may not be holding that have kind of been instilled in us in terms of if you can be trusted with money or not, if you should, if there's some sort of inherent reason that you shouldn't work if you're pregnant or going to have a family. And then on top of that, when you look at the work structure and knowing that it was designed well before the age of the internet, before the age of the iPhone, before this time where the world of work and home blends all the time. So I just think there's this huge opportunity to rethink why the structures that we have are in place at all, what the assumptions were behind them, and then what can we do to change them, knowing that the one thing we do have is 24 hours a day. And why do we bucket into 9 to 5?
Yeah, no, it doesn't have to be within those timeframes. And I realized I tend to work best for like 4 hours in the morning. I love taking the middle of the day off, going for a bike ride, getting out, running errands. And then I always get this second wave from like 5 to 10 p.m. And that does not fit with a traditional Monday to Friday, 9 to 5.
I know. And like people ask me like, oh, you have a regular job. When did you write your book? And I'm like, honestly, my best thinking and my most clear thinking, and maybe it's just because I'm older now and like I recharge in the morning the most. But what I would do is set my alarm, wake up at like 3 or 4 in the morning and like work and then like go back to sleep for an hour before the day started. Like, I feel like the 24-hour slots you have are for you to figure out what you want to do with, right?
Yep, absolutely. So this book just came out on Valentine's Day, the 14th of February, 2020, and it's a Techstars book. You are a managing director at Techstars. So why did you write this book? You talk a lot about your story in the book, and I'm going to be giving away a book to someone that reaches out. Send me a direct message on LinkedIn and tell me what about this episode resonates the most with you, because we're going to be diving into a lot of the things that hit me that I think impact women all over the world. But I want to start with finding out, writing a book is a big deal. You've got kids, you've got this busy career. What inspired you to undertake writing a book?
So I'd been thinking about the book for a while. I'd been working on different ideas even before I joined Techstars. And what inspired me to write it was that I had been at an event for like alumni at the college I went to up at UVM in Vermont. And I had talked to some women who I could tell were already getting stressed thinking about, okay, I'm graduating, I'm going to have X number of hundreds of $1,000s of student loans. And I'm on this path to a great career. I'm being told to lean in. I don't even see where family is going to fit into this. And the amount of stress I could feel coming at me, I was like, okay, wait, hold on. I did not have a traditional career path and, stepped away from the workforce when I had my kids and then came back in by starting my own company. And so really thought there was an opportunity to create a manifesto for, we can wait for legislation and we should insist on legislation that's going to support women and the initiatives that make everything fair. But at the same time, what can we do with the system we have in place? Like, what can we do with capitalism to actually drive change? And we actually have more power than I think we realize within the constructs of capitalism in our own businesses to actually drive significant change. And if we look at, companies ranging from, the ones that have disrupted where we stay, like Airbnb or Uber, or the kind of how we get from like point A to point B, all of these things have actually disrupted the way in which we work, the way in which we live. And so I wanted to create this call to action to women to think about, not just how do you start a business to create a little extra income or to, even have a great big business, but how do you think about things? Because when I get this to be scalable, I can drive change in a pretty meaningful way. And so I thought that was a pretty interesting approach. And then, I've just been incredibly fortunate to be a part of Techstars. And I had this kind of idea percolating around, and another managing director, we were at a meeting, said, hey, if anyone has an idea, make sure you send it along. There's a relationship with Wiley, the publisher. And so anyway, I sent over my proposal and I was very fortunate that they were receptive to it and sent it along. So yeah.
Yeah, and it's great. You talk about sort of fixing the system, and the system being the existing corporate structure by starting up. And you were just talking about all the disruption, and you're right. Sometimes you can try to fix it from the inside, wait for legislation. A lot of my listeners are from outside the US, so a lot of other countries are more favorable to women from a maternity leave standpoint. but maybe not necessarily from a women being comfortable and truly respected within the workplace. And like I said, we're going to be talking about a lot of the things in the book that hit me. We'd be on this call for hours if we touched on all of them, because honestly, you would laugh at how many things I highlighted and took notes on. So trust me, everyone needs to read this book. It's so worth it. It was read on a Sunday morning. I was sitting on the couch drinking coffee. It was a fantastic read. And the first thing I want to touch on is women not advocating for themselves. And you have stories, or you have characters throughout this book that carry through the book, and you go on their journey. And there was a story about this woman, Hannah, who expected that she was going to get recognized for her work. And she just anticipated that she would do good work and a promotion would come, and it didn't. Whereas a man she worked with, he set the expectation that he would get a promotion. He did advocate for himself, and he got a promotion. So how often do we see that, and what can women do to better advocate for themselves?
Yeah. So, I mean, I've seen this type of thing, anecdotally in my own experience, but when I was writing the book, I was doing a lot of research. And one of the things I was researching was there was a study that came out through SUNY a few years ago that basically showed that in early childhood, girls are more likely, whether this is conscious or not, this just happens, girls are more likely to be rewarded for compliant behavior. And when we end up repeating patterns that we experience through reward systems or through attention, right? So there are definitely studies that show that women are more likely to have been rewarded for compliant behavior, meaning you're answering the question that was asked, you're coming in on time, you're sitting in your seat, you're compliant. Men or boys at a young age are actually ignored for compliant behavior, but they get a ton of attention for misbehavior. They get a ton of attention for, you're not sitting in your seat, you're not doing the right thing, you need to stop doing whatever you're doing. So the thesis holds that as we emerge into adulthood, women are getting, doing what they think is the right thing, and they're expecting to be rewarded for it, as they always have been. And yet in the corporate world, that may or may not be happening. Whereas men are so conditioned to be like, it doesn't matter what I do, I'm going to do what I want. I'm going to because I'm not going to get in trouble, right? Like I'm not trouble doesn't matter. And, we were joking even in our own house, because I remember I have two boys, and, one of our kids, when my younger son, when he was little, said to me, and my husband in the car one day, he's like, so what really happens if you go to the principal's office? what is the ultimate, and obviously what they're learning is it's not that bad. It'll be okay. Yeah. Right? And so there's this conditioning that happens that I think makes women more likely to think that I did a good job, therefore you're going to reward me for having done a good job by promoting me. That doesn't mean that it never happens. It doesn't mean that people who do a good job and don't advocate never get promoted. Of course they do. But I kind of painted that picture in the book to say hey, this is an extreme example, but this is kind of the extreme of what we're dealing with. Is sometimes it's not enough in the corporate world to simply say, I hoped you noticed that I did a good job. You need to actually set expectations ahead of time and say, okay, in the next 2 years, this is what I'm going to deliver. You hired me. This is what I'm going to deliver for you, and I expect that this is going to lead to X, right? So just being able to message ahead of time about where you're seeing this going, and then hopefully being rewarded for that.
And I would say I didn't feel like it was an extreme example. That was one of those times where I had that kind of emotional, empathetic anger, because, and maybe it's just in financial services, and you've worked in financial services as well, but I know people all over the world where they will say, especially to, let's say, women in their 20s, that they need to be back office because clients aren't going to trust them, where you can have a male advisor with exactly the same experience, exactly the same qualifications, same birthday, that they will put in front of a client. And we see that happening too often, which is why I think that situation really got to me.
Yeah, no, I mean, when you say it like that, I'm like, oh my God, it wasn't extreme.
No.
Yeah, no, it's definitely interesting. So that's why part of what I'm trying to do with the book too is have people acknowledge that these things exist. Sometimes it's easy to gloss over things and be like, we're all on the same playing field and everything's exactly the same, but there are these unconscious biases that we bring with us, those that we're experiencing from others and those that we've actually internalized and are kind of taking it, we're not bringing our full self because of things that we're feeling inside and not even aware of.
And speaking of those, in chapter 3, you talk about why affirmations matter and that internal unconscious bias. And I cracked up. You've got a line in there on the fact that the book is called Yes, You Can Do This, not something less affirmative like women can give it a try.
Right, exactly. Well, if you go on Google right now and you actually just go to Google Images and you search the word CEO, what you'll see is a whole bunch of Caucasian men.
Yeah.
And you'll see in the algorithm that that's what gets spun up. And so what the reality is that a lot of what we believe is possible is because we've seen someone who looks like us in that. So the more we see someone who looks like us doing something, the more as a little kid, as our reptilian brain is, latching onto things, the more we can, have a sense that that's possible for us. If you don't see yourself somewhere, it's just very, like when you think about the people who are trailblazers, they're trailblazers because it must have been so hard to see yourself in this other place. And one of the examples I was giving recently, I don't know if you remember that old show, like Ally McBeal.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So Lawyers, kind of a silly show, right? But there was this study that showed that, around the time that show was popular, the number of women applying to law school increased. And it was like somehow, potentially, not, confirmed by science or anything, but potentially there was a correlation, at least, between women seeing something that looked like interesting to them in a role and allowed them to think about, okay, maybe this is where I could see myself. So yeah, I think affirmations are important because if you don't yet have an image of someone who looks like you in a role or someone who it comes from your background in a role, simply affirming to yourself, I can do this, I am in this role, I am the CEO, or I am the whatever it is that I want to be. Repeating those things actually gives you, I don't know that it gives you, but it at least calms down the negative narrative that may unconsciously be running in your head. And it gives it another parallel process on top of that.
When you gave concrete advice in there, and all of those kind of stabbed me in the heart in a good way, talking about where do you sit in a conference room? When you're talking about projects, do you say we do, which is a good team building, or do you appropriately take credit and say I do or I did? Are you often apologizing? My goodness, talk about something that women need to stop doing, asking for what you really need rather than just what you're likely to get. And then I would say the biggest one was, do you avoid sharing updates with your boss for fear of looking like you're bragging? And that I thought was a huge one, because how often, going back to the story with Hannah, do we think, oh, we're just going to be recognized and people are going to know? Everybody's super busy. They've got 101 things going on. We've got this global pandemic right now. There's nothing wrong with setting those goals and actually pointing out to your boss, hey, I got this done.
Yeah. And I think the key with that is that it's often easy for people to feel like they're bragging when actually they're communicating effectively is the way to think of it. Because when you're in a management position, and especially when you have remote teams, if you hear nothing, it's very, like your monkey mind it's very easy to assume something bad is happening. If we don't know what's happening, our natural instincts are to be like, they must not be doing what they said they were going to do, or something must be wrong. And at Techstars, we have an internal policy that's like, you need to assume good intent because we're so distributed. And that's really unique, I think, to Techstars that we do that. But generally, if people aren't in companies where that's a part of the core value system, you need to think about how you're managing up and around and over. And so, if you've set out to do XYZ for the week or the quarter or whatever it is, make sure you're documenting that and make sure you're sharing that with your boss or whomever it is that you need to communicate that with, not because you're bragging, but because you're helping them understand what's going on. And that allows them to make better decisions, not just about who to promote or not, but okay, what's working, what's not working, what's going on. Oftentimes we end up just communicating the things that are going badly because we need an escalation point, but you really should be communicating everything because it helps people understand, it helps your manager better manage others in addition to potentially highlighting the good work that you're doing.
That's so true. And as you're talking, I'm thinking about, when I've had people that I've managed, I've had to try to watch myself because I have no desire to be a micromanager. But you're right. If there are things floating around in my head that I don't know if they've gotten done, But
Yeah.
they have, well, I'd rather just have a message saying, hey, I got all these things done. Great. They're out of my head. I don't have to worry about it. I know it's done. And then I would imagine it also creates a really great paper trail when it is time for a quarterly or annual review. You've already sent it all. Make sure you're filing those or copying, every day or week or however much into a Word document. You're ready for your review.
Exactly. And, same thing if you're starting a company and you're thinking about, maybe you're not ready to raise capital or think about raising capital yet, but someday if you are or need to be, having thought through and then have a record of, hey, I always do what I said I was going to do. Like, here are the things I said I was going to do every quarter. This is what I delivered. And maybe you delivered more than what you said. But even if you never share it with anyone, it's actually a great confidence builder for yourself to be like, oh yeah, I actually did that thing I thought I was going to do. And I checked it off my list, right?
Yeah, and that feeds into being a perfectionist and how women are stereotyped as being a perfectionist. I have struggled with that personally a whole lot, but you did lay out a really great way of, like you just said, setting those goals and then communicating, hey, I either made the deadline, I beat the deadline, and being able to say that you got it done. And having that deadline, I think just whether you are a perfectionist or not, it forces you to, here's the deadline, get it done, move on.
Exactly. Because perfectionism is sort of a trap because the word perfect in it, it's easy to kind of think, oh, they're kind of paying me a compliment, like I'm a perfectionist. But actually it implies that you're not ever delivering because you're chasing some perfect version of perfect that doesn't exist. So being able to set deadlines, hit deadlines, even if it's not perfect, but demonstrating that you deliver, I think is actually a more critical skill. And it's a way for people who struggle with perfectionism to actually feel like they're creating standards that they can adhere to, which I think is kind of like a weird calming mechanism for people, myself included. So,
well, I was thinking back, Jen McKay on episode 21 said something that really hit me when she said it. When she and her partner Nina started their business, they're two women that bridge the gap between technology and financial services providers. So not an area where there are a lot of women. And I asked her, looking back, was it challenging being a woman? And she said that they didn't realize it at the time, but they were really underestimated as women. But she put a positive spin on it and said that actually made it really easy to over-deliver. And I'm still kind of on the fence about, like, was that a good way of looking at it, or does it really tick me off that even happened in the first place?
Yeah, I think you can feel both sides of that, because I think they were, from what you just described, they were thinking of it from a survival, standpoint in a way that served them. And certainly, like, knowing that, and I try to put this in the book too, like, hey, even in these kind of situations that seem kind of dire, like you're the only woman in the room, try to think of the positive component of this, which is like, I think people remember me, if for nothing else, they'll be like, oh, you were that lady who was in the room with me. And you can have like a follow-up conversation with them. But yeah, it's definitely, I definitely think there's still a lot of underestimation out there. And I definitely think that even among women, it's still true that, if I were to tell you, like, hey, let's get ready, the CEO and the admin are coming over in a second, and two people walked in the room, a man and a woman, you might still assume that the man is the CEO, whether he is or not. And so checking that bias inside yourself is super important too, because it informs, how people get treated and how people feel. And it's kind of an interesting exercise to kind of check your own bias as well sometimes, myself included.
Well, we all need to. And there's this, it's kind of a silly show. It's a new series on Netflix. I don't know if it's a seasonal thing or what, but it's called 100 Humans. And it's 100 totally random humans, all in the US, but every age, gender, background, you name it. And they go through all these crazy experiments to test, human behavior and myths and whatnot. And they have one where they have 3 women and 3 men. And they ask people one by one to come out, and they get one single question for each of those people. And then they have to pair them up about who they think they're dating. And every single, it was so good. And every single one except one of them got it wrong. And it turns out there was a gay couple, a lesbian couple, and a heterosexual couple. But even the gay and lesbian contestants, they got it wrong. And it was such a gut check for them because they were like, why did I not think about that? I'm a woman, I'm married to a woman, and it never even dawned on them. They themselves just assumed they were all male-female couples.
Totally, because that's the thing. Oh my God, I need to watch that show. I haven't seen that. That's the whole idea. Is like, even when you are consciously at a different place and a more evolved place, you may unconsciously still hold stuff that is baked in from, I mean, like the people who are running for office today have grandmothers who probably were not privileged to vote. I mean, like, we're holding in a whole lot of, unconscious bias from many, many years of stuff happening.
So not only do we do that externally, we do that internally. And you talk about standing up for your business, and I would say standing up for yourself as well, and fighting imposter syndrome.
Yes. I have imposter syndrome constantly. I don't know what I'm doing here talking to you.
I'm in that club too. So, this is our regular weekly get together.
Yeah, I mean, and I think this goes back to, and I welcome your thoughts on this, but this goes back to affirmations. This goes back to, really being, okay with taking a step back and one, affirming that you belong in the room or wherever you are. But the other part of it is, one of the tricks I try to give people is, even now in the investor community, you hear people say, you don't really need a full business plan. You don't need to write a full business plan. And I'm like, I agree, like, to present to someone else other than like government agencies and stuff, you probably don't need a full business plan at certain stages of your company's development. But it's actually a very good way to gain confidence in yourself by taking the time to write something like that out and do the analysis in a very deep, methodical way, build your financial projections in a way that's very like organized and thoughtful, thinking about a true 5-year plan and how you get there. Not because you're thinking about, okay, I need to share this with someone else, but you're building confidence for yourself that, hey, I actually know what I'm doing. I've got a 50-page document if you want to see it on how this whole thing works. So I'm not trying to get people to do more work than they need to, but if you're struggling with imposter syndrome, it's sometimes helpful to do that extra work and not think of it as a tool that you're going to share with others, but as one that you can use for yourself.
Well, and that goes into sort of making a vision board, because I was thinking about the vision board. You talk about it in the book on, thinking about starting a business. And, again, a lot of the book is around starting a business, but it is still applicable to, well, what is your career? And if the vision board is looking at what do you want 5 years from now to look like? What does it look like to be with your family? And right now, everyone is spending probably more time than they ever have with their close family stuck inside all day. Do you want more of that? Do you want less of that? It's making that vision board, and that might just show you that you need to change your path, whether it's leaving and starting something new, whether it's advocating for yourself for a promotion.
Totally. I mean, and it's a concept that I hadn't really thought about when I was younger. And frankly, I think if someone had told me when I was younger, I might have been like, that sounds kind of hokey. I'm not sure what that means. But as I've gotten older and actually implemented it, it's incredibly helpful. So, I mean, being able to think, sometimes it's very easy to go through the motions and follow a path that you think you're forging your destiny, but you're really kind of trudging along a path that someone else may have set for you. Yeah. So if you can take a step back and think, okay, I could wave a magic wand. I don't know how I'm going to get there. I don't know how I'm going to do this, but in 5 years, I can see myself in this type of location, or this with this type of success, or with this type of relationship, whatever these things are that are at least fantasy interesting to you, put them on a board. Like, put them either, whether it's on a Pinterest board or on an actual physical hard board that you cut magazine pictures from. But not so much because it's like a magic wand, but it's ingraining in your brain, like, as you look at it, like clarifying your vision, like, is this really where I want to be in 5 years? Like, do I really want to be sitting in this office in 5 years, like, so shuffling through the same thing? If I want to be going up and down this elevator every day, I don't know, maybe you do. Like, but thinking about what that world looks like, and then that gives you a clear framework to start to think about, okay, if I trust that that's possible for me, like, you have to believe that that's actually possible for you, whatever that is. If I trust that that's possible, I think I can come up with steps to help me get there. And like always holding and then continuing to refine whatever that vision is. But the more I work on this type of stuff, the more quickly things happen, which is really weird too.
And that they say that all the time, right? If you write it down, the amount of times that if you write your goals down, that you actually end up accomplishing more of them, especially if they're in a place that you can see every day, if they're in your closet or on your bathroom mirror, because I would say that's probably a form of that affirmation, right?
Yeah, no, totally. And like, even like silly stuff, like I'm going to lose X number of pounds, or I'm going to be in shape, like, there is something really simple about, okay, I'm not going to probably shove as many cookies in my mouth today. If I actually put a picture out that like has me on a beach in like 5 years, like, so,
Yeah.
so like, there's just kind of like the silly components to it too. But like, there is something about seeing that picture and then thinking about, okay, how are the actions I'm taking today ever going to possibly get me to what I'm saying my perfect picture is, right?
Yeah. Well, and what about, would you suggest people sometimes even start smaller if they want to, if it's their first time? Again, I think thinking about financial services and how many financial advisors and financial planners come from a very traditional business. I keep wanting to start another podcast called Ditch the Mahogany because that's what it is, where they have to be in the office. Everyone's suddenly shifting to working remote, realizing it is possible. It'll be really interesting to see how many businesses allow that more flexible remote work environment going forward versus how many are like, nope, you still have to be at your mahogany desk. Knowing that this all happens so suddenly, it can be scary to think right now in this time. I don't know that I can think 5 years out just based on nobody would have pictured this 5 months ago. So what if you just start small and think, hey, there are things about working remotely that I like. There are things that I don't. I would imagine a lot of people, whether they realize it or not, are thinking right now about how all of this impacts what they do want their next 1 to 5 years to look like.
Totally. And you're so right. If you're under stress, like we all are, whether we're admitting it or not right now with everything going on, it's very hard to think 5 years out if you're under stress because you're thinking about survival, right?
Yeah.
So you're thinking about today. So I recognize that it's an incredibly stressful time for a lot of people. So I think you're right. One way around that is to think, okay, let's just take a look around. Where am I today? Am I in a house I ever wanted to be in, or an apartment I wanted to be in? Am I in what am I doing? Am I enjoying what I'm doing? And then, if the answer is yes, great. If it's not, what would better look like? And it's not saying, I don't like where I am, I want something else. It's like actually being affirmative and saying, I see myself here. I don't see myself there. So yeah. And on the short-term plan, or even if you're thinking, you're a financial planner, more than I do about this, but even sometimes with, financial planning, it's very overwhelming to think like, oh, I'm going to save, millions of dollars in the next X number of years. But you can think like, hey, I can save like what I would have spent on a cup of coffee today on something small, right? And so taking those smaller steps sometimes is a great bridge to get where you need to go.
Yeah. And I keep thinking, I want to circle back to the imposter syndrome because, thinking, and for anyone that's not familiar with it, it's, really a condition where people feel like they're not worthy of the success that they've achieved. And that's one of the things that I think I'm seeing more and more in doing this podcast. And I've shared before, and I always will, I am completely committed to having 50% of my guests be women and from all over the world, because there are so many women, Claudia, like you, that have had amazing careers, that are doing amazing things, and then in turn championing other women within, the startup world. And it's been way harder than I anticipated to get women to come on the show. And as I was reading your book, that was striking me over and over. If a big part of it is that imposter syndrome and women who have achieved success and are doing great things, not allowing themselves to acknowledge that and not doing those self-affirmations and then those outward affirmations to say, hey, look, I did something really cool. I want to share that with the world. And I want to be that example to other women that, we know we haven't always had throughout history.
Yeah. I mean, I think, and I don't pretend, I certainly, and maybe this is my own imposter syndrome, but I certainly don't pretend to have all the answers here. But one thing I remember these threads happening with people that I've worked with and had on my team at different points is I remember saying to people, look, we need to get to the point where we realize like, we're the grown-ups. There's no other grown-ups. We actually have to fix whatever this is. And, I think maybe it goes back to the fact that, my own mother anyway, and my mother's peers, my mom was actually a really, really great math student, and she got a scholarship to college. And she even shared recently, she's in her early 70s now, and she shared recently that when she was getting ready to graduate from college, she was actually told like, wow, it's really too bad that you're a woman because you would have made a great engineer. So, but realizing that like, that was my mom who got that message. And she's certainly not the only woman of that era who got that message.
Yeah.
And so I think there's this need to recognize that there is a history by which women have not been trusted with money, have not been told that things were possible for them. So it's almost like when you grow up and you become, a 40-plus-year-old woman one day and you're like, oh, I'm actually doing these things. You're like, wait a minute. I didn't think I was allowed. I didn't think I was capable of doing these things. No one ever told, like we're, even though this has been happening a long time in terms of the ability, women are 50% of college graduates or 70% of high school valedictorians, right? Like, even though we make up these great stats in education, the stats in the Fortune 500 are ridiculous. It's like less than 6% of Fortune 500 CEOs are women, less than 20% of corporate board seats are held by women. And what that really says is we haven't fully made, like, there are certain women who have managed to do it. Those are the trailblazers. But we haven't really, like, as a group, accepted that it's possible for us yet. So we just need to start accepting that it's possible.
Yes. And ridiculous is an understatement, but that is why we need to be out there and showing that there are women that are doing great things. And we need to have that mass. And that's another thing you talk about in the book is there is still sometimes competition if there's only one. There's only one woman in a company or in a group. That doesn't help.
No, not at all. And I think that's, there's this idea of like a scarcity mindset. If we only see one or two women who have so it's on one hand, you're so excited for the women who have gotten through the path and made it to the other side and they're in the leadership position and we're all like rooting for them. On the other hand, you're saying, wait a minute, look at the stats. There's not enough slots for me. And so there's this and I'm not saying I feel that way, but I'm saying like, I think there's a scarcity mindset that unconsciously happens where people feel like, well, I don't see enough women in these slots, therefore there must not be enough slots, versus like education where we've all decided like, it should be 50-50 because 50% of people are women. Somehow that message hasn't made it all the way to corporate America yet in a meaningful way. Think of it as like a token woman, like one woman in a leadership room, she's more likely to try to assimilate with the group of men and like be one of the guys and share what the guys are working on and take a viewpoint there. Once you get, two, like, over, a certain percentage, so say you have like 3 women in a room, then women start to feel more comfortable actually sharing their unique viewpoint, not feeling like they're somehow representing an entire percentage of the population. They're just presenting their viewpoint.
Well, and I want to make sure to give a huge thank you to Dave Bruno, who works at Enviso on their Insights Advice project. And we had him back on episode 20. And he's the one who introduced me to you, and he's introduced me to a number of amazing women.
Yeah.
He is amazing. So Dave, thank you. It's been so inspiring. And as soon as I mentioned to him, I told him, I was like, Dave, I'm struggling finding great women. He instantly sent me this list of like 8 women from around the world. And I was like, yes. So we also need more men like him that know, recognize, champion, and support women.
Yeah, if Dave is listening, Dave, you're awesome. Dave came into our program last year and like to volunteer as a mentor. He's got this amazing background in finance, and yeah, he's just a great person. That's so awesome. Thanks,
yes,
Dave.
he is a great person. So one of the other things, as I was getting to the end of the book, that was, you put it in a way that I had actually never heard before, but I have long not been great at balancing life and personal care and eating well and exercising and sleeping and all those, basic human needs. I tend to be a workaholic. And there was a line in there where you talk about how balance is like riding a bike and you need to put the right pressure on either side so that you can move forward.
I also tend to be a workaholic, and I've definitely had moments where I've struggled with being completely out of balance. That's been like an interesting lesson to learn over time. But yeah, I think it's very easy sometimes to think, oh, well, I'll put, if I put X number of hours here or X number of hours here, then I'm balanced, then I'm fine. And really, it's like a constant, like just like when you're riding a bike or if you're learning how to drive a standard car, right? Like you're constantly putting pressure on both sides. So you're thinking, okay, I'm putting a little bit into my personal life, my family right now. Oh, I'm falling off my work side. I need to put a little bit more there. And if you can keep thinking about like little bits that you're doing on both sides, I think it's a lot easier to make a lot of progress versus leaning heavy on one or heavy on the other at different moments.
Yeah, it was a great way to put it. And now I notice myself all day today kind of thinking, and I've fallen off the bike today. I worked all day. We've got a storm rolling in here into town. I was like, the heck with it. But I did notice myself thinking about that more. And I at least got up away from my computer a few times more. So like I said, so much good advice throughout the book. We touched on like barely any of it. So like I mentioned earlier, connect with me on LinkedIn, shoot me a message about what you heard that resonated with you. I mean, we talked about, I feel like a dozen things that you can actually put into place today. What resonated the most with you? Link to the book. You can get it on Amazon, but I'm going to pick one person that reaches out to me on LinkedIn, and I want to buy the book for you. So wherever you're at in the world, I want to make sure you have the book. And if I get a huge response, I'm more than happy to buy the book from multiple people because it's something, like I said, no matter where you're at in your career, no matter what career path you're going down, there's so much great sage advice in it. And as we are in this huge time of disruption in financial services and financial planning, a lot of it is talking about creating a disruptive business, doing something different, and creating a startup. And I think we need that. And we need that from a lot of women in the profession to create innovative ways of approaching financial advice and financial planning. So, Claudia, for those that want to get involved with Techstars, can you tell us a little about it and how they can get involved?
Yeah, so I'm currently a GM with Techstars, and at Techstars, what we are is we are the worldwide network designed to help entrepreneurs succeed. In short, we're a company that makes investments in startups, and we also partner with large corporations and help them on their innovation journey. So to put that in perspective in real terms, we have a couple of different divisions. The one that I'm most actively involved with is our mentorship-driven accelerators. So we run 50 accelerators around the world. Each one only accepts 10 companies at a time. We invest $120,000 or up to $120,000 in each one. And we put them through a program where we surround them with amazing high quality mentors, up to 100 per program, and really help them do what often takes 2 years of pivots and turns in the world of a startup and try to compress that into 13 weeks and then help them on their journey. So we have a number of programs like those in city programs like New York, Boston, London, LA. Those are subject matter agnostic. It's really up to the MD to figure out which companies are the right fit for that year. And then we have other programs that are run in partnership with a large corporation like Stanley Black & Decker or MetLife or Barclays, and each of those has its own vertical focus. Like Barclays obviously is fintech, MetLife is insurtech, and Stanley Black & Decker is advanced manufacturing. And but same overall program, just different managing director and different companies, different mentors. So yeah, Techstars we're focused on, it's a founder first company with it's a pretty exciting organization to be a part of. And then we also have about just over 200 million in under management to invest in like companies that either come out of the accelerator or series seed or series A investments. And then we run a number of like community activities around the world, like called Startup Week or Startup Weekend, that really is meant to like encourage people to consider entrepreneurship and get communities engaged. So super exciting company. I joined it because it was the type of organization I wished I had access to when I was starting my own company.
So for those out there that are thinking of starting your own company, make sure that you're doing those positive affirmations. We all have imposter syndrome. You are not alone. Reach out to me. I'll hop on a call with you and we can have our own little imposter syndrome virtual happy hour during this lockdown. But read the book, get inspired. We need you, especially women in the profession. We absolutely need everything that you bring to the table. And I'll link to, Claudia, you also have a podcast, The 43%. Tell us what that means.
Yeah, so I started a podcast. We're actually going live with a trailer for season 3 tomorrow.
Awesome.
It's tomorrow, April 8th, April
8th.
9th, I don't know. So the 43% the name is a nod to the fact that 43% of women do still step out of the workforce at some point when they have kids. I was actually way back when featured on Lean In. I'm a big Lean In advocate, Sheryl Sandberg's book. But I've also seen this debate emerge over time on, should you be leaning into your career? Should you lean out? And there's a whole bunch of dialogue out there, much of which I think is a false dichotomy. And so what I wanted to do was have younger women in particular hear more stories of what was possible for women navigating family or family decisions and career. So I've interviewed CEOs and authors and tech gurus and doctors, and really just trying to paint a bigger picture with a broader stroke of what's possible. Again, going back to that idea of affirmations, I felt no better way to do that than for people to hear really great stories. So, and now we're going live with a mini season 3, starting tomorrow. And I'm super excited because we're going to be trying to dig into the changing world of work and this new crazy coronavirus land that we're all in. And I've been on so many calls in the last few weeks where there's babies crawling on men's laps. And I'm like, wait a minute. When I started my podcast, my first trailer, I'm talking about the fact that I negotiated my first term sheet, which didn't even go that well, from my older son's closet, because I was so desperately trying to compartmentalize, my home life from my work life.
That's fantastic. Another topic that comes up a lot in financial services is women that leave the industry or profession and struggle to come back in. So another great resource. I'll link to that in the show notes. I'll link to your LinkedIn, to buying the book, to Techstars. It'll all be in there. And I would love to have you on the show again soon. Claudia, it was so great getting to know you. Thank you for your book, for the inspiration it provided me. And I know that it will provide to many listeners.
Thank you so much. Thanks for the interview. Great to connect.
Thanks for listening to the Innovating Advice Show. I would love to hear from you directly about what resonated, what didn't, and what you'd like to hear in future episodes. You can connect with me on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, or Instagram at Innovating Advice, or hop on over to innovatingadvice.com. Till next time.